Hello, welcome to Setting the Stage, episode 86, Wuxia Adventures in RPGs, Daniel and Metanoia / Ithasen. I'm your host, Isaac Shaker, and this episode is recorded with a friend of mine, Daniel, who also hosts the Tabletop Community Spotlight with me, which is a quarterly, not really a contest, but more like a community spirit thing where everyone submits things, then we review them on a live stream, and just come together and look at cool stuff that people are designing in the RPG space. So Tabletop Community Spotlight is one thing I do with Daniel, and that's abbreviated TCS. He uses that abbreviation sometimes in the interview. The other thing that I do with Daniel is we met together on the Tales from Elsewhere Discord server, which is a space for talking about RPGs and design and stuff, and that's abbreviated TFE, which is another abbreviation that Daniel uses. Daniel is here today not talking about either of those things very much, but focusing more on his game, Metanoia, and the setting that comes with it, Ithasen. Ithasen is a complicated setting. I think it's really well done. It's in a really good place, and you should consider running some stuff of your own there. And Metanoia is like this Wuxia, like cultivation development game is the focus, and it's more free form than some other ones where it's like you have to learn eagle claw attack. This is more of a narrative focus for that, while still having mechanics and interesting things that happen to your characters. So let's get the ads out of the way for non-Patreon listeners. If you don't like them, subscribe to the Patreon, and then we'll get into the episode. I'm here today with Daniel, who I already know from hosting the Tabletop Community Spotlight anyways. So, hi, Daniel.
Hey, Isaac. How's it going?
It's good. It's good. How are you doing?
Hanging in there. Amid all the house stuff going on, we finally got an offer today. Very excited for that to move forward.
Yeah.
But I mean, fingers crossed. So.
Right.
Yeah, excited to hop on and talk with you.
Yeah. Where are you guys moving?
Yeah, I'm local to Texas. I won't give any exact information, but we're not moving super far. We're just kind of moving across town. We're just in a spot with a lot of bad traffic that we're trying to avoid. So.
Yeah, no, I understand. Wanting to move around traffic, definitely. One of my friends is dealing with that now as well.
You think it doesn't affect you that much, but when it takes you like 20 minutes every day one way to go get necessities when you're in the city, it kind of becomes a problem.
Yeah, it's just the build up over time. Like when you think about it, like 20 minutes each day, like moving gets you like a year of your life or something over
basically.
Time. Yeah. I much prefer my remote work now because I don't like the commute. Being in the office is fine, but just the having to waste time driving back and forth
drives me mad.
All right. Well, we got our usual questions about who you are outside of RPGs. So who is Daniel besides Tabletop Community Spotlight host and creator of Metanoia?
Daniel is just an average guy that, has a wife, and single married life with a dog. So DINQUAD is the acronym for that. I work in tech as a product manager, and I really love TTRPGs, and a lot of the for me, a lot of it's like the kind of like self-reflective moments you kind of can get out of it when you're inhabiting characters. That's one of the most sublime parts about the hobby as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Those are the real points that I feel like create strong memories, as well as this was the best part of that campaign or something like that, is those moments.
Yeah, I think it's for me, I think with a lot of craft and artistry as a whole, you want your work to produce meaning, and I think for TTRPGs, that's where the meaning is truly produced, is something that transcends the table, comes back with you into the real world, that you get to reapply to your life in some way, or changes you a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I wanted to go through the different things that you're creating before we get to Metanoia and Ithasen.
Yeah.
So you have the Tabletop Discourse blog. How did you get started with that?
Well, been in TFE for a long time, like with TCS, and a lot of the discussions that I saw were going on didn't really have a lot of common vernacular to kind of have those discussions. So I mean, you even still see it today. If you're in that Discord, you'll see new threads pop up, and a lot of the same language is rehashed, or people kind of miss each other's points because there's not really the right terminology, or even in a lot of ways, not necessarily a lot of structures of thinking about how to address certain parts of either game design or other aspects, or the mechanics themselves, experiences as a whole. And so that was kind of the foray into tabletop discourse, and it's still ongoing. I haven't posted in a little bit, but I have a couple articles in the backlog that I want to release soon. But it's meant to just kind of be overall like a resource, just a free resource for everyone to kind of post articles, to read articles, to kind of get into other people's headspaces. Like I want it to be very much like anyone can go right on there, right? I'm only holding it kind of just in the editorial standpoint, not in gatekeeping. So anyone can come right. I'd love to get the contribution, but it's very much focused on game design as a whole.
Okay. Yeah, trying to get more about glossary of terms. I think Peter's done some videos like that as well, actually.
Yeah, once Peter finishes his game, I'm really hoping that I can get him to write some articles, because he already has those thoughts out there, and I don't want to repeat his words for him,
Right. Could practically just transcribe some of his videos.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the simple, the level of it should very much be the kind of simple diagramming of, okay, here are these concepts, or here are the more complex relationships, or is this really the right way to think about this? And it's not so much that what gets put up on the website is this is the truth, unilaterally accept it, but it should be arguments that people make and other people can react to and have different opinions and stances on, and so that discourse can happen, and we can kind of dig more into why certain things are the way they are. I think it's great to have those conversations in a server, but you end up inevitably getting to the point where they stop moving down into the depths and the meat and potatoes of it, and you're kind of stuck at surface level just because there's not really a way to talk about it effectively.
Yeah, definitely. So you're imagining something more like a newspaper's editorial column, kind of?
Yeah, partially that, or academic research libraries, things like that. I kind of want it to move that direction, but I'm not going to expect that level of rigor.
Yeah.
I do want it to be more away from opinion pieces, though, as a whole.
I do think, coming from an academic space and then wanting to do games and stuff, it does feel like there's a real lack of hard information within the RPG space. Who likes a Powered by the Apocalypse game? How do you find that out? What things do people like from a systemic point of view? And I mean, it's a social game, so it's not like there's a perfect answer for that, but it feels like there isn't even really any answer besides do what works.
Right. Yeah, that's the base problem. And for a designer, there's tons of designers in TFE. It's well, how do they figure out what are the words that they use to describe what they're trying to design, and to get feedback, to understand where those pitfalls are, to learn, right? I think that's the biggest thing coming out of it is there's no way to talk about it. There's no way to learn about it. And so everybody ends up having to do the same work. There's no building on the shoulders of giants happening. Or if it is, it's only because you had to go do an intense amount of learning and research on independent systems, or expend an exorbitant amount of cash to do so, just to buy these systems, to understand what they're doing and why they're doing. Right. When instead, okay, we could abstract away from that, present a little bit more educational content, and then maybe have a little bit better of a discussion for free.
Yeah. I think one that one side too many in the server complains about frequently is people's use of tactical, because he's used to the meaning within a specific military context.
It's stuff like that where it's one side will probably listen to this, and so don't hate me, but I think it's exactly stuff like this. Like, well, tactical, what does it mean for it to be tactical? Does it mean that it's in the context of combat, or are we saying that it's granular decisions that you're making to achieve a strategy? Or like, there's a lot of ors there. And without that, like, okay, let's just agree about what it is to start, right? I think that's like the heart of what a discussion is like, the semantics may not be right at the start, and that will evolve over time, but you should lay out definitions so that you can at least understand what the other person is saying.
Yeah, it's an issue of like laymen using language that like experts have more clear definitions of. Where, like,
right.
Tactical has a specific meaning within military language that is not how it's used outside of that space.
Or even in the TTRPG community specifically, like a lot of tactical, when they say tactical, a lot of the connotations, at least that I read, right, and this is because we don't have the semantics, is like, oh, I'm thinking, all right, combat's tracked on a grid, there's really specified turns and actions, maybe paper buttons, exact movement distances, like it has a lot of connotations about what the system is going to present to the player and the GM.
Yeah, there's sort of like this sense of what it means, but yeah, it's not perfect.
Yeah, like, so it as a label versus it as a subject, right? And again, that's kind of, like that's the purpose of TTD. That's kind of my other project. It's a little less maintained than me working on Metanoia.
Yeah, and the other project we do together is the Tabletop Community Spotlight, where we co-host it, and it's.
I mean, Isaac does all the really hard work. I just show up and look pretty. So
you keep me from being too critical.
Yin and yang here.
Yeah. Daniel's the nice one, and I'm the tech side of what we're doing there. But it's once a quarter. We have a theme that we announced that's like, when we're recording this, it's shields and cover, but I think that one won't be done when this episode comes out. And people submit those, and then we present them on a live stream so that you can be spotlighted. And it's not a contest. We're not really trying to be critical. It's more like positive feedback about what we think works well within what people have presented.
Very much a great way to learn about the different ways that people handle these, and also about how they can apply into different systems that have different goals. Like, I've really learned a lot actually from like being part of that hosting process, and it's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
And it's also just like a nice prompt. Like, if you're like, oh man, I need to write my system, but it's so hard. And I'm like, okay, right. Here, write this bit.
Here's a little nugget of inspiration and some free marketing.
Yeah. All right, on to the topic of the episode, Metanoia and Ithasen, which is one of the settings for Metanoia. So which came first, the setting or the game?
The setting by far. The setting has been in development and undergone countless iterations probably since, I want to say maybe like 2012.
Ooh.
So it's been like sitting in the back of my head, and now a lot of those thoughts are kind of coalescing, but it's kind of the way that it's been moving. The setting came first, and right around COVID is kind of when I got into like, I want to play TTRPGs in this world, and I need to be able to evoke the setting. And what's really interesting, when you go to define mechanics, the two kind of become intertwined more and more, where it's like, to really grant the experience that I want from this, you have to like, you have to kill darlings. You have to be like, oh, maybe the world building doesn't really work there for these specific aspects. And I think a lot of the changes in the world building and where it's at now really did like come about with me trying to figure out how do I mechanize this for the unique experience of living in that world. In a way that's actually runnable, enjoyable, and thematic to what I hope people are considering when they approach the world as a whole.
Yeah, and I think from a certain perspective, like trying to have those, like the setting and the mechanics of the game match up is required to kind of stand out.
Right.
Because if you make something that's sort of bland but functional, it's probably not going to be chosen for anything.
Yeah, I've seen it before where like a designer will have something that's like specific to a setting, and they'll produce something specific for the setting, and they'll have a bunch of good ideas, but they'll want that to kind of occur in different universes or different worlds. And I started off like being like, oh yeah, I have like several worlds that I'd love to. I had to nix that because I'm like, no, this should be about this, right? And you lose the specificity and the ability to make that experience very different because of the setting, because of the world, if you try to like generalize it.
Did you do that? Because I remember that Metanoia had like 2 or 3 settings when I looked at the document a while ago.
Yeah. I recently started to do that. Probably like I have the other settings, and I've been primarily focusing on Metanoia with the intent that it is for Ithasen. I had the like holdout hope that maybe I could apply it to other settings, and I finally nixed it like a couple months ago. I was like, yeah, no. And I think it's gotten a lot better as a result. Like there's a lot less to be concerned about the system handling in general.
Okay.
So,
right.
Yeah, the other setting was a sci-fi space opera kind of thing, but I don't want to dig into that too much.
Yeah. Okay. Well, since Ithasen came first, let's talk about Ithasen first, and then we can get into Metanoia, the system mechanics side of it after that.
Okay. Where do you want me to start? Maybe a question, because you have some familiarity with the lore. What interests you?
I would like to start with like the tone first. So it's a Wuxia game.
In a lot of ways, yeah.
Yeah, but most Wuxia games are sort of Chinese inspired, and it looks like yours is more Japanese inspired from the source material.
Yeah, I think so. I wouldn't say that it's a Wuxia game. I think in the like experiences of it, probably like I think it operates with a lot of the same like depth and detail around how ki or chi works in more traditional Chinese fantasy as a whole.
Yeah.
But I do take some pretty big. I think I take some departures from that, and I think I'm referencing a lot of big things, but it's like, yeah, it's in the genre probably of Wuxia, and it's probably more in the like gritty flavor of it, where you're really wrestling with. I think at least in the gameplay and in the world of Ithasen, you're more wrestling with the concept of like favor and gratitude as a whole, and that kind of like core idea throughout the world, right? Everybody really kind of belongs to a faction in some way, shape, or form. Learning how to build your own power on your own is insurmountably difficult, and there'd be very few that could come to prowess that way. As kind of like baselines for it. And I think the other departure really from Wuxia in a lot of ways is and Zhanja as a whole, because I think it's kind of on the line of Wuxia and Zhanja.
Yeah.
It is a bit of the cosmology and what it is, what Ren is as a force in the world, as will or latent intent that your intent resonates with, or that you accumulate and build and shape. You polarize it into different concepts, and the way it responds with your values as you kind of then collect more will, amass it, make it increasingly make your will more dense, and therefore more impactful. Like the kind of characters that you get that are mid to high level, right? It's subtly, right, their will, their intent, right, every part of their being, right, the cells in their body at their core have this will to live, so that naturally affects the environment around them, where certain dangers don't quite pose as much of a threat because their will actively works against these other things that are occurring, both physically and metaphysically in that sense. So it has a lot of parallels and overlaps, and it has some big departures.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure what you're describing there about like concentrating your will is necessarily a departure from
No,
Wuxia
it
because
isn't.
so
Like
many
that
different
whole
systems.
like dense, like having your will become more dense, and that's very wuxia at its core. And I think
Yeah,
a lot of the like polarization of your will that I described, or that I mentioned, where you polarize your will, that's just meaning like you have these certain visualizations or conceptualizations of your will that could be of fire or of an animal or literally of anything. That becomes like this polarity of your will that's tied to a specific value that your character has. That's very wuxia in and of itself, right?
yeah,
So lots of like parallels there. I think the big departure is really the metaphysics of it in some ways, not the actual like power system in a ton. Also, there's awareness is like another thing that's very wuxia coded as a whole in the mechanics of Metanoia, but socially in Ithasen, every person that wields Ren has this, like the first thing that you do when you learn Ren is you gain an awareness. It allows you to sense Ren and the different polarities that are in the environment around you. So, like, and this is great for game design as well, because naturally, as your character kind of walks through the world, you're going to be able to gauge, oh, this thing has much more dense Ren, or I'm detecting this Ren polarity in the environment. I don't know where it is, right? It's not like it lets you see things in that side. It's just a little layer around them that GMs can use to like hook and give little tiny, oh, hey, here's this little bit of extra information to foreshadow. That's I think a really powerful and fun tool, and it has a lot of social implications as well for living in the world. Right, you don't want to just scan everyone indiscriminately. You're going to get a lot of very unfriendly gazes at the very least, or maybe beat up.
yeah, it's rude.
It's rude, right? Hey, I'm going to inspect you and exactly what your values are without. And it's very invasive. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so that's where I wanted to start, was like the general tone of the world. So Ren is the central focus of like this spiritual power, similar to ki, chi, or there's a couple different Japanese words for it, but your spiritual
Reiki or
yeah, you've given a good description of it already. We don't need to do more comparison words. And you have it structured where there's different levels. But you kind of just mentioned here about like the density, but you did give some specificity to that within the rules of Metanoia as well, that kind of spill over into the setting definition also. You want to talk about those?
Yeah. So the like I call it realm, and that is very, like, if you've ever read or watched Wuxia or Zhanja, that is very much inspired and brought from that. The density of the Ren that you gain, like, it determines kind of at you're an order higher, right? Your will is, because it is more dense, is an order higher and dominates the wills that are orders below it. So it's not a linear kind of progression in that way. Realm is a very exponential kind of jump. So the first realm is void, where you don't have Ren, you can't sense it. Like, so that's most people. Awakening Ren usually takes some kind of either traumatic experience, strong emotion. There's a number of different things, but that puts you into the realm of Spark, where you can sense Ren and you can start moving it, you can start interacting with it, start storing it. The first thing you're going to do there is start to learn to circulate it. And once you have a circulation that flows on its own, it naturally condenses again and then you're at realm 2, which is the flame. After that, it's really just how many different like solidified, dense suns of Ren are you storing, kind of, so to speak, throughout your body. The third realm being the star, the fourth being a constellation, where Ren at its like microscopic level, so to speak, is structured in like patterns and like two-dimensional geometry that you might draw on a graph paper. So little sigils kind of thing. And the constellations actually presents your own signature of Ren. A galaxy is like creating constellations, as the next realm is creating a constellation of constellations, and then singularity is not defined on purpose. So I'm not going to spoil that. But
okay.
Singularity at its core, though, what is understood is that it's the realm in which you become the metaphysical layer of a concept throughout reality. So you become the idea of war or of leaves or wind, that sort of thing.
Okay. So this seems like the constellation idea of like having sort of a central core of Ren that you're then like creating other ones. So it's not that you're just sort of building up a bigger core, which I think is how a lot of other similar stories work. It's more like you have several cores.
Right. Yeah, you're building fractal geometry of your own Ren pattern or sigil that then amplifies itself into a higher density. And you just do that at different layers. Once you have that like solidified, that first core, then you're just amassing that until you reach there.
Okay. Yeah, fractal geometry. That's a nice way of looking at it. And not everyone wields this spiritual power. I feel like that's a consistent part of this. There's normal people, and then there's special people that you've called Rennim.
Rennim, yeah. So the normal folk, they exist, right? I think the other thing to note about Ren is like just because you have Ren doesn't mean you're going to be successful at pursuing to learn how to use it. You need resources to raise your realm. You need training to be able to use your Ren effectively. Like just learning circulation is the biggest challenge in terms of becoming a Rennim, because how do you circulate this force throughout your body consistently without it like ripping it apart? So there's a lot of danger in learning at the very beginning how to become a Rennim. Once you've mastered it, then you get all this extra, like all this extra power and capacity that you can kind of use. But like there's a big barrier. A lot of it has to do with knowledge. It's mostly knowledge and resource. The first step I mentioned is that kind of experience where you then are able to like start sensing Ren, because your will was either compressed to a certain point or challenged in a certain degree, right? And you felt Ren in that moment.
That's an interesting thing you mentioned there about being damaged by it, which I think is another consistent part of Wuxia stories, is being damaged by cultivating your ki in the wrong way. Is that something you've represented in the rules as well? I know I'm skipping ahead a little bit there.
Yeah. So in the rules, I have wounds. I have strain as a track, and strain is the primary thing. Mm-hmm. Each character can only have at the most like 3 wounds, but basically what you can do is you can say, oh, I need to reduce the amount of strain my character has, and strain being the resource that represents the Ren that you have, or your physical stamina, your mental capacity, kind of all together, because they are so interrelated. I need to reduce the amount of strain that I have. Let me take a wound, right? Or when you do take a wound, wounds are rated with that strain or that amount of Ren. That's how much strain you have to spend to clear the wound. So there's like that, okay, I can damage myself to gain more, so that I'm able to fight more, or able to push out that really big ability, right? Like I like to think about it like you have to build up your body into infrastructure, right? Think about it like a bunch of highway overpasses. And if you get too much stuff on the highway overpass, or things move too fast on the highway overpass, and it inevitably damages that infrastructure. So that's part of the danger that comes with wielding Ren. It's not a super huge focus, at least that I wanted to have in terms of the gameplay, but it is there as an interaction that can be had.
Okay. So try to shove too many cars through your Ren pipelines and you'll have an accident.
Yep.
Okay. All right, yeah, let's talk about the setting. So, what is the actual world of Ithasen like physically? Is it a continent or a disk? Like, what's the deal?
Yeah, so Ithasen is a continent. It's the one word for the remnant continent as a whole, and it once was the wild continents. Like it's a pretty large continental region. There's a central Mediterranean kind of sea with kind of an archipelago in the middle of it that separates these two larger land masses, and then in the southwest there's a large arid desert region. But the west coast is relatively settled. The eastern portion has a lot of unclaimed and wild territories still. There's a lot of things kind of going on with that. A few hundred years ago, from the date and time, at least that the lore is presented, or so, one of the lineages, I say one of, there's multiple lineages that escaped some giant disaster that occurred in their previous continental regions, and they traversed the sea and settled here. And hence it's the remnant continent, where when they first discovered the wild continents, that's why the name kind of changed as a whole. It's like, oh, well, we actually moved our entire civilization there.
Okay. So, what was the disaster that made them leave?
Yeah, so we talked about Ren, and we talked about the realm of singularity. There's a concept of spirits, and it's not in Ithasen, and it's not like ghosts in the way that like a lot of other media describes. These are metaphysical layers to reality, or pieces of it, layers. So if you think about a concept, right, or if you're familiar with like Warhammer 40K's lore about the warp, where there's enough collective consciousness about something and then it appears and it has its own consciousness. When you become like the realm of singularity, you turn into that concept as a whole, or that principle. So gravity is one of those things. Gravity is a spirit that you can then interact with, and the spirits themselves are become these like core parts of the world. Like they kind of act a lot like you would expect the Greek pantheon. They have drama. They're more or less still maintaining the, like, they're above human, but they definitely are problematic from the observer's perspective.
So, they still kind of act like human in a way. Okay.
Yeah, they have agendas. They have things they don't like. That stuff. They're fighting over things. And one of the big themes that's kind of occurring in that celestial cosmological realm is that there's two stances really, and it's that spirits can descend into mortal bodies. And that is always catastrophe, because the only reason they descend is to rule. The disaster that occurred that brought 3 of the lineages to the remnant continent was a spirit descending and another spirit descending to fight that spirit. So their continent is effectively just torn asunder and broken. So the vestiges of their civilization are practically like they're gone. There's nothing to reclaim. The event was called the Shattering in terms of the like scale of what it did to their continent as a whole.
Okay. So these spirits sound like they're more like gods in how you've described them here. That's kind of what the Greek gods are. Some of them are supposed to be concepts.
Yeah, precisely. They operate as that layer and as a tool for the GM to set up certain interactions if they want to play games that kind of interact there.
Okay. Yeah. Let's talk about each of the lineages that you have here.
Yeah. So there are 7 lineages. We have Anamor, Elkyr, Janim, Daruner, Nil, Okoi, and Haqol as the 7. And a lot of people don't enjoy the Star Trek view of like, oh, they're just humans but slightly different. And at least appearance, like from a form perspective, not necessarily like a color, texture, or different some other minor features, but this kind of falls into that. So just for those listening, they're not super different in a lot of ways. They're all part of one species that can produce offspring. But they all are aligned. All 7 of these lineages are aligned with a different fundamental polarity of Ren as part of their species. It's kind of part of who they are.
Okay.
And you have to have the lineage in order to be able to interact with this polarity of Ren. So it's not one that's tied to a character's values. It's one that, if you develop Ren, you can start interacting with Ren with that polarity at the start. The nil are influence. It's this idea that Ren exerts and receives force from and to reality. It's the bridge between will and the world. The Janim have the law of elasticity. Ren bends, but it doesn't break in terms of its structures. What's displaced seeks restoration of form is a principle that occurs. Recurrence is for the Okoi, where Ren recurs and it establishes cycles. There's flux for the Elkyr, where Ren circulates and exchanges between things. It's moving. Even if it's still in place, it's moving through time. Haqol have the law of harmony, where Ren can vibrate or harmonize concepts that are alike to produce greater effects than normal. The Anamor have conversion, where Ren can alter its nature to persist. So it's both that Ren is difficult to change. It doesn't break, but it transforms into a new texture or a new pattern of Ren. And then so there's 2 more. There's coalescence and emergence. And coalescence is really important, and I'll talk about why, and that'll lead me to talking about emergence and the one of the end state kind of things that's happening in this setting underneath the hood that I think drives a lot of the attention. So the Daruner as a lineage have this law of coalescence, where Ren, it's a statement that Ren can't be destroyed or created, but it can be removed from a space or concentrated into a space. And so as a result, this bloodline, this lineage, has a lot of significance in terms of the economy of the world, just from being able to coalesce Ren into objects, or to be able to seal Ren. And so they often find their way into this polarity. This law of Ren is very important to civilization as a whole, just from a prison standpoint to a coining and minting standpoint. But the thing with the Daruner as a species or a lineage, sorry, not a species, as a lineage, is that there's no known purebred Daruner around anymore. They're all gone. Nobody knows what happened to them. They just don't exist anymore. Everyone's like, what has happened? All that remain are those of other lineages that also have Daruner lineage. And they're called highborns because of the social and societal importance of that polarity of Ren. But one thing that's interesting with the Daruner lineage in terms of how it's passed down is that, let's say your mother was Janim and your father was Daruner. You are half Daruner, right? Let's say that you're a Janim, a highborn Janim. You marry another Janim, and your offspring is not 3/4 Janim, 1/4 Daruner. It breaks the kind of fundamental genetic pattern there, where you're actually still half Daruner and half Janim. And so if you introduce other lineages into the mix, right, it actually balances the proportion those lineages have for you. So let's say that child that is still half Daruner and half Janim produces a child with an Anamor. Now that child is 33% genetically all of those different lineages, and it continues to go on. And so one of the core things that's happening throughout the setting is all of these lineages are kind of, because all of them have been kind of compressed to this continent, things are like, it's been a few hundred years since the spirits really stirred, things are happening, right? Part of the big tension and tensions that are underlying, right? The GMs can choose to resolve them in their games or not, but is that, what happens when you have all 7 lineages all together producing the Theredim is the last lineage, where effectively, because of how the Daruner lineage works, a Theredim having a child with a non-Theredim, non-all 7 lineages, produces an all 7 lineage child, right? And so all of the lineages as they've been known disappear, right? That's around the corner for the setting. And there's a lot of tension going around that in the world, especially with, especially just between the lineages. It's not, it's like there's a couple steps till that's happening, but that's one of the things that's kind of set up in the world. In terms of describing the lineages, maybe a little bit more in terms of their.
Let's not get into them just yet.
Yeah, here, I'll stop there for a second.
I have a couple different questions, and then we can get into more specifics about each of them. First, you're using the word lineage to try to avoid race because of the connotations with that, and species because they aren't different species biologically.
Correct. Yeah.
Which a lot of games are doing, and I get it. The thing that's interesting about that choice is you've also just described setting up a racial conflict within that. Or I guess we're going to call it a lineage conflict within how yours works. Do you want to talk about your decision making there? Or?
Oh, yeah, tons. I mean, there's tons of it. So to start, maybe the more pressing and the first one, because we talked about the remnant continent, right? So the Nil and the Elkyr and the Janim came from those far off continents. But all of the other lineages were already here on this continent when they came. So the Anamor, the Haqol, and the Okoi were all already living in the wild continents. And so the Anamor were very much pushed out of their homes, being more localized, small tribal groups of people were pushed all eastward as these massive empires kind of came and set up shop in the western regions of the continent. The Haqol, because of the unique polarity that they have of harmony and being able to make similar concepts produce greater than normal together, they're very much, because of, we talked about how Daruner lineage balances, they're almost hunted by these highborn families that are looking to bring that bloodline into their family.
Mm-hmm.
You have the Okoi, who kind of just, they set up city-states across the continent, and they're essentially the dwarves of the setting, to make a crude comparison.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of inner tensions between the interactions of the lineages. In addition, kind of going back before the wild continents, or to the days of when these were the wild continents, in the place where the Nil and the Janim were enslaved by the Nil for a very long time, on the order of 1,000 or so years. And there's a lot of still racial tension between those two people groups as a whole, right? There's a lot of racial tensions in the world. It's very much prevalent in the way you think about it now. But the reason I avoided the word race is simply because I very much view it as they are not different species. They're not different races. They're different lineages of a singular species. And so that was the reasoning for the specific word. I think in relation to the modern terminology, it would be understood as racial conflicts. Absolutely. That there's a lot of that. There are places where it is much more pronounced in settings and certain interactions, like the Janim and the Nil hate each other's guts. It's not so much that they hate other lineages. It's just that they hate that if you're that other lineage, right? The Haqol are kind of hidden off in the wilds because they can't be found. If they do, they're going to just get kidnapped and their entire, like, the rest of their society is basically just going to die out, or the rest of them will get killed because you don't want anyone else to have that power, right? That's the sort of like dangers they're facing. The Anamor, they're okay, we are starting to realize what this means. We have all this land. We're trying to now develop into a civilization, or while also keeping our old like traditions and our roots and the things that make us who we are fundamentally. So there's a lot of that kind of interplay in the world itself.
Thank you for answering that. And I think another difference between other Wuxia stories in the way you've described lineages here is that it's not a very frequent part of Wuxia stories. Usually pretty much everyone is Han Chinese, or I guess it's not mentioned. But the race or lineage for characters in the stories that we have within China doesn't matter. And in the sort of Japanese equivalent stories, I feel like occasionally there's representation, but it's very egalitarian, and it's never a focal point for the story. And in this case, I mean, it's not the focal point for Ithasen, I'm sure, but it is a point of conflict.
Yeah, it definitely is a big point of conflict. And like even in some like, and like I agree with you. Like with what I've read, most Wuxia does not address anything in relation to these kinds of topics. It's much more focused on class or on status or backing.
Yeah.
As a whole. So this is one of the big departures from that perspective of like of what the world is.
Okay.
And the way I've set this up is driving actually towards unification, not to say like there is no cultural value in any of these specific lineages, but it's very much just like, as danger comes from around them, right, from all these different people groups as part of just the setting, they're going to come to, like, the players, the GM, people are going to come together to face the danger, right? That's a lot of the like loose framing of it from that perspective. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to make a huge commentary by any means on racial issues.
Okay. I just sort of stumbled into it through designing stuff that was fun.
Yeah.
Okay. Good answer. I think, I mean, within fantasy situations, we do often have, like, elves and dwarves are at war and orcs are evil. So, like, having racial conflict is already a thing that's there. I was just trying to get into, like, the lineage versus race is an interesting point, and I wanted to break it down a little bit more. Because it on the surface, there's nothing unusual about what you've done here for having racial conflict in the first place. That's a common thing within RPGs. I guess I had another question about how the Haqol are set up within your world. It's more just like, is it in bad taste to have like a sort of rape plot as part of the larger conflict going on within your world? It's not like that's unrealistic necessarily. Like, I feel like if there was a magic lineage, like, that might be how it's treated within the real world.
Yeah, it does pose challenges. Like, I guess the question is really like, are you trying to engage with that plot? Like, that's kind of, yeah, exactly. Right. So, and we can talk more about I think that's where the purpose of the game fills in there a bit more, and we can talk about that. Like, I would never want anyone in this world kind of engaging with that, other than like maybe fighting one of the Janim houses that have crossed across the Elkyrian archipelago to go hunting for Haqol past the easternmost reaches of Anamor land, right? Where, like, that's the kind of, that would be a good adventure to play, right? I think that could be a lot of fun, but going and doing that would not be great. I think it's not just that the Haqol also are like there and nobody helps them. They are actively in league with the United Anamor nations for protection, and they also provide like a lot of research to them to helping that society develop. So there's a lot of distance and a lot of barriers from it happening. It does, like, it's something that can happen, something that could. But yeah, I very much in talking about the tone of Ithasen as a whole, it's not meant to, like, I'm not trying to get into super details in a lot of these things, but I am trying to represent, it's a world that's fundamentally broken and filled with people that do things for power. And yeah, it is ugly, and it results in some very ugly things. Am I gonna like surface that to the forefront if people are uncomfortable with it? Absolutely not, right? That's not the intent at all. And, like, the goal is not to present fiction that makes people like so just like uncomfortable, but
right.
Or like is completely just like, oh man, I really don't want to be there, you know. But I also don't think that it should, like, you lose a lot of the texture and a lot of the parts of it that make it like genuinely interesting to wrestle with or to experience if you strip a lot of that, like the real world conflict aspects of it out. It's a really difficult line to balance, and people definitely have different stances on what is acceptable, what's comfortable, what's not. And I think honestly, like, the goal of Metanoia as a game is that it's a tool for self-reflection more than anything. And right, that's why you're going to be so concerned with your character's values and the decisions that they make. So the setting has to have those ugly bits so that you can go wrestle with them, with these values, with these different worldviews and different perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's probably like the biggest like caveat. Is like, otherwise there's not really a good reason to include a lot of that stuff. It's not super palatable in a lot of ways, but for those reasons, yeah, actually you kind of need ugly parts of the world to face up with when you're talking about values.
All right. I feel like I've discussed that enough, and I'm ready to move on if you are.
Yeah, I'd like to.
All right. Let's see. So you mentioned that they don't have any like physical differences that are obvious immediately. Is that right?
Well, that's not the case. I would just, like, if you're expecting like there to be the gamut of differences physiologically between like orcs and gnomes, it's not quite it. The Daruner, the Elkyr, the Haqol, and the Nil and the Okoi all look very similar. The Daruner have skin that looks like it's obsidian, and then as they awake coalescence, like a pattern appears on their head of their Ren signature. The Elkyr are, and also the Daruner have like pointy ears. Like, these are the shades of elves, effectively. Elkyr, their skin is like, it looks like chrome, not much different. The Haqol, it looks like gold, so it's hard for them to hide, because that's, really deep world building. The Nil, ashen gray. The Okoi have a copper complexion. Otherwise, the Janim are kind of the port of humans, other than they're just a little bit taller and they have an extra kidneys and livers. And the real physical diversity comes with the Anamor, because their biology, with the law of conversion being the thing they're attuned to, adapts with the blood of the predators and prey that they consume. And so they have some drastically physically different appearances. So one of the tribes is regarded as the Titan tribe, and they're barely a tribe at this point because they mostly revolve around a large city-state in a large area. They're the most organized of the Anamor sub-lineages, so to speak. They're like somewhere in between like a bird, a catfish, and like a dragons as a whole, in terms of their like the physiological texture that they have. So they'll have scales. They might have the dendrite. Is that dendrite that catfish have? I'm forgetting the word.
Oh man.
Yeah, or the
barbells.
Barbells. And they'll have feathers, but they'll have roughly a human form, right? For the most part.
Okay, so these are very obviously different, and would sort of match more like the physiological differences that we see within fantasy races compared to between human racial construct physical differences.
Right.
But they're not different species. They all can still sort of have children with each other, like you described before.
Yeah, it's the different laws of Ren that kind of pull them into these individual lineages.
Yeah. The Ren differences I was also curious about, because you've gone with more of a like philosophical difference for how their Ren is set up, instead of like these are the fire people and these are the earth people, and you know how that's sometimes set up in other
right
similar things. What led you to make that decision instead of going in the sort of a more obvious and overt difference between their Ren focus into something that's more subtle?
Yeah, so I think the like subtlety of the species is more like I wanted it to center around how Ren operates fundamentally in that sense. Not to me, a lot of elemental systems are subtly philosophical.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, like Atla is like the prime example. But I feel like the like core laws of Ren here are, let's describe how Ren works, because that's only like the surface in terms of the depth of like philosophical approach to Ren that I want characters and people in the world to be able to take. Like the concept of like DAOs or laws in a lot of Wuxia really inspired me there, where like, why does that have to be separate from Qi? Is kind of a question that I was like, I don't think it should be in a lot of ways. Where, like, does that make sense? I'm struggling to explain that a little bit.
Why don't you describe what you mean by DAOs? Like, I think that's something that I have a vague understanding of, but I think a lot of people listening might not.
So so the idea, you have a concept or a principle or a property or some idea, right, that you then gain understanding of, and that understanding, the depth of it, continues to increase your ability to then use that DAO or that law. I'm not sure this is like 100% DAO focused, so this is where I think like my sources kind of differ a little bit. I'm not super focused or knowledgeable about Taoism as a whole as one of the like key things that holds up a lot of wuxia as a genre. But for example, let's say that I study the law of sharpness and I gain understanding into the law of sharpness. Well, with the law of sharpness and my mastery of this law of sharpness, I could then take that principle, that idea, and use that to turn something that is not sharp physically, right? Like a sphere or a cauldron, something like that, and make it able to cut something, right? Not by reshaping it, but because I'm applying this concept of sharpness into the world, right? And that, that kind of approach to Ren is, I think, much more in the vein of where I wanted the like player choice to go in relation to the characters and their values, in addition to the focus that I wanted to have on the mechanics of Ren, because I didn't want it to be overgeneralized. Like I want within Metanoia as a system, I very much want to be able to represent like different ideas and about the world, kind of coming out not just in terms of their like philosophies, but also with how individuals define their own power in a lot of ways. Like a lot of games, you'll get presented with, oh, here's the firebender, here's the waterbender, here's the earthbender, but here's like, oh yeah, make your own, or in a way, like, oh, you want to wield gravity, you want to wield What's the weirdest? I mean, like laws of Ren are some of the most complicated, or I say maybe not complicated, but abstract ones. And I think they're like a good, like, hey, this is how conceptual you can go with this, as opposed to something that's maybe a little bit more easy to grasp.
So it's in a sense trying to demonstrate to people that are reading the system where you can go with what you're picking for your Ren polls or focuses.
Right. Yeah, so like the law of conversion could be, I'm going to convert. You could have your character develop an ability with the law of conversion to convert damage type A to damage type B. Like, let's say you're getting hit with something and you're really resistant to fire, so you convert this like cold ray into fire so you take no damage. Or you can use it to convert your physiology into a different form, right? Like, so it's very, very conceptual, and the limits are really about the character and the player's visualization of what these words can mean or be applicable to.
You were talking earlier about the Dao, because Dao as a Chinese word means way,
right?
But it's because Chinese doesn't really work necessarily as a direct translation. Sometimes words aren't translated, so they still have this like quality to them of what they had before.
Right.
What you said about like the Dao of sharpness is something that's present in other Wuxia games where you like focus on learning, practicing sharpness in general, and then you can cut anything with like a stick or like a karate chop or like a hair or
right.
Yeah. So that's present not just in like more modern Wuxia stories that we sort of get the genre from, but that's also present in like ancient Dao texts as well. So I think that's in the Dao De Ching, or maybe Zhuangzi. But so that's a very old idea, definitely well grounded in Chinese philosophy. Just wanted to bring that up. All right, we were talking about the lineages. Let's get back to those. So you have 7. I think you described 2. So we have 5. Well, you gave some vague descriptions. Do you want to give us a basic run through of the 7, and then we can mark it off?
Yeah. So the Anamor are a tribal people. They, with the law of conversion, they often take on the different physical characteristics naturally of the animals that whose blood they consume. So, we have the Titan tribe we described as like, catfish, bird, dragon thing. You have like there's a bunch of them. There's one that's almost xenomorph from like the Alien movies, up in the region that the Nil kind of as another lineage have established. Lots of different tribes. Goham is kind of like, I have a bunch of major ones, but there are countless tribes or pockets that could be found literally anywhere of them because their anatomy can change so quickly, or at their will. So there's potential for like a random tribe, for you to interact with a random tribe almost anywhere, because that's how deep into the wilds they've been. Some of them don't even know that there's been this mass migration of people into our continent.
Like an uncontacted tribe?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, one of the thoughts I had for a campaign around that was to have like let's go find a bunch of uncontacted tribes. You're like doing sociological, or that's not sociological research. What's the anthropological research? That's correct. So it's a fun one. And we talked about the Daruner pretty in detail. Nobody knows where they went. Elkyr, they're the ones that basically figured out how to get the Janim and Nil over into the new continent. They occupy the central archipelago that kind of divides the regions of the larger regions of the continent. So the western regions are Nil in the north and Janim in the west and the south, and then you have the most of Anamor centralization and unification efforts in the east, and the Elkyrian lands are kind of a bridge between them. I have a lot more detail about their habits and society overall, but they're a seafaring kind of very, very much invested in maintaining personal freedoms kind of community. You do get a lot of, so if you spend your days in the Elkyrian territory, you'll be taking boat from one island to another. You'll probably run in with pirates, good old sea shanties here and there, that sort of thing, to get an idea about the Elkyrian lands. The Haqol we mentioned, they fled to the wilderness away from all of the others, just because their lineage is very valuable. It's very powerful. The law that they have, and it's viewed that way by a lot of highborn houses that would just either hunt them for sport once they find one that they can introduce into their bloodline. But yeah, so the only known remaining settlement is somewhere to the east of the Anamor lands. One unique thing about their culture specifically is that they don't accept anything without some kind of collateral. So their society is very structured in that way. It's everything is a very meted transaction. We talked a little bit about the Janim as the human substitutes with a little bit taller, extra kidneys, extra liver. They are very family and faith oriented, at least as a people, and that's partially coming out of the thousands of years, or the 1,000 years of slavery that they were under. And there are two Janim civilizations. One is Dosharan, and the other is Shajara. Shajara is a desert land, and lately all of its borders have kind of been cut off. They've cut off contact with the rest of the world, so who knows what's going on in there. But Dosharan is very much like your fantasy kingdom. That's very much applicable to that land as a whole. They have a very firm view of and firm value on education as well, being the center. Being that country being the home to the Gate of Zerathrain, which is the setting's magical college. In addition, they also have the setting's adventurers guild, so to speak, but there's a bit more nuance there, but we can come back to that later. Lots of stuff going on in Dosharan. It's meant to be where you have those kind of fantasy campaigns. It's tailored to that.
Okay.
The Nil are, as a lineage, they have a very interesting trait in that if you are familiar, and we talked about Star Trek a minute ago, they have this property where they, in terms of emotion, they either feel everything at 200%, or they feel nothing emotionally. And they're also a pretty hardy people because of their the law, right? The law of Ren that they're attuned with naturally, of influence. They're hardy, sturdy, strong, fast, natural-born athletes, and they occupy a large swath of territory in the northwest region of the continent. Very aesthetically, you can take a lot of both Viking and Chinese, but also what's the other?
Mongolian?
Yeah, a lot of those influences aesthetically, plus plate armor. But yeah, they kind of organize their scenario very much into the Nil territory is very much something that if you were familiar with Wuxia, that would be very familiar to you in terms of feel of the social structures. You have the imperial family that's in the present state kind of declining. You have several sects that are kind of vying for power and kind of controlling their own territories and trying to keep things afloat. There's a lot of good conflict to happen between those specific parties and factions. But yeah, it's very much a land of like where status means a lot as a whole, culturally. Yeah. And they have, and as a species, because of their hardiness, they tend to be pretty long-lived. So they have some of the oldest records of any species, of any lineage in the remnant continent that they claim go back like 10,000 plus years, but the Janim scholars naturally say that that's questionable. There's no way. This makes no sense. How did you bring those with you when you were just trying to leave the same continent that we were? The Okoi, they're very tradition focused. Like tradition for them is everything, and they very much have the stance where once you're in with an Okoi vouches for you from a specific city state, the city state will accept you as like very heartily. Otherwise, they're pretty standoffish. And yeah, like with traditions, like one of the big ones for them is like dedication. And they do a lot of dedication ceremonies as a whole, whether that's of like people for any given religion within the setting, or for like the buildings, all that stuff. It's a very important part of their day-to-day life. And the city-states have communication with each other, and just because of they're built into mountains, they have a lot of strategic, but also challenge in terms of being able to take them over. So they're not easily messed around, like they're not easily messed with because they do keep in contact well. They can mobilize even across the entire continent to respond. So they're best left alone as like the random merchant that just lives here that you do business with in terms of the like geopolitical perspective.
Everyone needs a Switzerland.
Everyone needs a Switzerland. So
it sounds like from the different lineages, they are basically how you're structuring different countries for the most part. So like these people have this country, these people have this country, and maybe there's more than one country for each of the lineages, but they're largely homogenous. Is that right?
I would argue they're not necessarily homogenous. There may be some shared values and bylines, just because it's only like it's been a couple hundred years from the like initial colonization, and especially for the newer entrants, they probably haven't had enough time for their culture to drift super significantly. And again, it's a small remnant of their people that have moved into this new place. So while it does, there is a level of like homogeny between the groups. I wouldn't say that it's completely homogenous. Like you will find a lot of other lineages within the Janim country of Dosharan, right? There's a lot of trade that happens between the Elkyr and the Anamor and the Janim as a people group, and so those peoples mix. Okoi leave their city states. They're around,
Let me give you an example. So, like, in the United States, we're a much more integrated nation with, like, a lot of different racial groups within it. Compare that to France, which is, like, 95% ethnically French.
Right. Yeah. I see what you're saying. I would say that, like, the general feel of Ithasen for a lot of the countries is a lot of the city centers probably feel a lot more international in that way. Mm-hmm. Where it's not as homogenous, but a lot of the rural probably does feel extremely homogenous to the extent that you're talking about, like with France.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned like we talked to death the conflict for the Haqol. Are there other conflicts that are occurring within the world between these different countries?
Namely, Dosharan and Shajara as the two Janim countries mostly. When they came over and they established themselves, Dosharan and Shajara were actually part of one empire called the Urban Empire, and there's a movement to allow those not of highborn standing to actually be able to serve on the parliament that they established. And so as a result, that's kind of when the two countries split. The southern house of, I believe it's Dajamir, said we don't want to do that, and they also were finding relics and technology out in the desert of a long lost civilization that's more and more coming up as part of another central theme of the Remnant Continent setting in Ithasen. And so they dissipated, and there's a lot of tension because Shajara used to have a lot of dependency on Dosharan and other countries for food and other things, and trade has really dried up between these countries, and there's rumors of like spies or conspiracy and just odd happenings kind of along the border between these two countries that give a lot of people very uneasy feelings as a whole. And you'll move if you were to, for example, travel into Shajara in the state of the lore presented, you'd end up kind of getting turned back. There's a lot of inner regions that you wouldn't be allowed into as a foreigner. So it's very much become a lot more closed off and a lot more dangerous as a result. The Nilvish country Lithaway, obviously the Nil and the Janim have this long-standing racial tension.
Mm-hmm.
The Nilvish imperial family is like that whole imperial line is like at a precipice. Like there's a lot of uncertainty there as to what's going to happen in relation to the future of Lithaway as a whole. There's 4 heirs that are up for succession, and the current emperor is not doing well. So a lot of the conflict, I would say, is not in between countries within Ithasen as a whole, with that exception maybe of Dosharan and Shajara. It's really internal. They're all kind of falling apart from the inside.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
I mean, not all of them. It's not like but that's a lot. That's a theme I think that you'd find that recurs.
And I think it's easier to design plots that way, where you don't necessarily have to take in like geopolitics into your consideration.
Yeah, and I think it leaves the door open for GMs to say, yeah, actually, I do want this to be because of a geopolitical thing, right? Or not, yeah. Right? And I think that's one of the things about the setting is like it's not. I have like ideas of where the events kind of go from a canonical perspective, but I very much am not going to present those, just because I want to leave it open for like the telling of your own stories.
Yeah. Just gotta leave those blank spaces for groups to fill in.
Yep.
Are there language differences between the different lineages as well?
Yes, there are. Unfortunately, that is a little bit a part of the world building that I probably have left a little more unattended than should be. At least phonetically, though, the name of the different species give you a pretty good idea of the kind of phonetics that their native languages use.
Right, yeah.
You do have that. I do have that going for me as like a little logic that I've snuck in to try to make this all gel together, but I haven't discussed a lot of the like language barriers or differences in terms of like grammatical structure or anything to that level of detail.
Yeah,
at this
place
point in time.
names can also help with that a lot.
Yeah, and like this project as a whole is something that like I'm getting a lot of ideas that have been sitting in my head out on paper, but it's also something that's very much still like in progress. Like it's not just been like slowly building on a foundation for 10 years. It's been built up to a certain point and then reiterated on, right? Darlings killed over and over again. And it's gained little pieces and little bits of detail kind of each time.
Yeah, and I mean the online guide you have here is like, I don't know, if you put this onto a printout, it would be like 70 pages, something like that. It's already plenty for filling like the setting portion of an RPG book.
Yep.
All right, religions for the world.
Yes.
When you have like actual magic, like religion feels like it has a different focus, because there can be
Yes.
sort of a science to how this works.
Yeah, so there's a couple that at least of the mainstream. There you've got your like cults off in the boonies that are like really organized around polarizing and conceptualizing their will and their Ren with corruption or some very dark concepts as a whole. But the more mainline ones are the Order of the Divines and the Irialan. So the Order of the Divines is you have 7 deities. One of them is a deity of destruction and death. And there's a few different branches of it. There's like an orthodox branch, there's an ascensionist branch, and a naturalist branch. Because of the way that, like, we talked about how realm works, where, you slowly develop the density of your Ren until you basically become a concept in the world. There's like, if you worship as part of that religion in a certain way, like no Rennim, except for maybe delusional ones, would actually join that branch at all, because they're like, that's not the mechanics of it, to your point exactly. So like the Orthodox branch states that these 7 beings are divine beings that govern sets of spirits and operate through them in the world.
Okay.
So Rennim will join this one. They won't join the naturalist stance, which is that these are actually spirits, because they actually there are Rennim that have interacted with the kind of polarities and ideas that are attributed to these beings, and it's like, no, I know what that looks like, and that's not how polarities work in relation. So it has to be something other than a spirit specifically. And then the Ascensionist standpoint is basically that we talked about how spirits descend. Spirits in their mortal bodies can also have children with these lineages, and those children are called Indrir. And the Ascensionist standpoint is that these 7 were actually Indrir that then ascended into spirithood as another branch, but a more offshoot one of the Order of the Divines.
Okay. Yeah, Inter was something else I wanted to talk about. Because the way you described it is like they're spirit crossbreeds, so they're just super strong because they're basically half gods. Yeah, that makes sense. There's a mythology about that I can understand from the Greek mythology perspective that you were talking about before.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that definitely has parallels there. I just always kind of thought about it more as like a Nephilim in scripture, or like in the Bible.
Yeah, I think that also works. What I wanted to know is, like, you described like human Yinjur, or whatever lineage we're counting here as human mortals. But what about like animals or plants? Are there any that come about from crossbreeds from that perspective? Like, it's less love in that sense and more just kind of that's how mythology works sometimes.
Oh, yeah, that's not one that I think I've delved into at all. The way that I've historically been thinking about that is that for non-sapient things, instead of like having that ability to produce this offspring, it's more that they become so engorged or enraptured by this polarity that it then like reshapes them fundamentally.
Mm-hmm.
So it drives them mad basically with that polarity. If the spirit of death were to descend, you'd have all these animals, and like you'd have basically a dead zone where all the plants awoke to Ren. They all have a polarity of death, and it's a terrifying place to go, in addition to the animals there. Mm-hmm. Right? I think that's more the kind of like impact that a spirit would have in its mortal body in relation to these parts of the environment. I think this is probably another place where I differ, or I depart from Wuxia, as I don't provide scenarios where you have non-sapient, so sentient non-sapient creatures becoming sapient in that way.
Yeah, and even within Wuxia, I would say it's a rare occurrence. Like,
right. It's more Zhanja.
yeah, Wukong's a good example, but like he's sort of the only one, kind of.
Yep.
But there's also the sense in like the older stories like that all of the animals are sort of sapient and sentient.
And they're waiting to develop ki, and then they develop a spiritual sense, and they
Yeah. And that is a bit different from more modern wuxia stories, which are very human focused, and animals are animals.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's also not to say that like animals can't awaken to and learn, but it's just that they don't become sapient.
Okay. Yes, they sort of still use it through instinct.
Yeah.
You described this a little bit before about like there's a lot of organizations within Ithasen that people have to be members of to not sort of get eaten by the wolves or other organizations and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that reminded me a lot of wuxia stories, where there's this concept of the Jianghu.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is like the river ways, because that's kind of where like the court is up high, and then down by the river, down by the docks, is where all the sort of criminal elements gather. Not because wuxia stories are always about criminals, but they're typically about people that live on the edge of society and go around solving problems for other people that live on the edge of society. Like, they need an adventure. A little village needs an adventure to come solve a problem because
right.
the police won't for whatever reason. Is that the intention for what you're doing with Ithasen, that's where the stories will take place?
Very much so. I think there are stories that could take place in the reception room of a king, in the setting where you're, acting as an ambassador or something to that kind of extent, or political intrigue. But I think a lot of the day-to-day kind of things that actually happen in the world are much more closely aligned with what you would expect kind of as in the Zhanghu. Within wuxia, where it's just like, yeah, you're a Rennim, you're a part of a different world now, that their intent, right, literally is all of their power, and so their whole lives are focused around this one thing in a way that only they can truly understand and truly operate in. In addition, you have all of the forces that are trying to like vie for power within that nebulous net. It's a dangerous world, and you need friends.
Yeah.
Or maybe not friends, but at least someone that will come save you.
Yes, yeah. And what you said about like, oh, maybe there's a scene where they talk to the Imperial Magistrate, like it's sort of like that's the quest giver within a lot of campaigns. It's like, oh yeah, the Duke says go do this, and then you go away from the Duke's palace to go do that thing.
I actually would argue that's not really, at least for Ithasen, that's probably not actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah, do you want to tell me a bit more then?
Yeah, so like within Nilvish lands, you have the sects that are all vying for power, and they're all trying to make sure that their areas of the Nilvish lands are producing as much stuff so that they have the most money to buy the most resources to advance their realms of their ranks the most, right? And so in that kind of format, yeah, you'd have the sect leader putting out requests for the sect, or just information, and that flow being really important for each faction to advance its purposes. The thing with like Imperial factions, the Imperial faction in the Nilvish lands, is they're going to have their own Rennim in that way, that they'll assign to do tasks for them when necessary. The kind of like campaigns that I think are much more common are you're like that sect member or you and your buddies are, you guys are aligned with this sect. You're studying there as disciples, and you're trying to get more resources or a higher position of status. Or in the Janim lands, we talked about the Eventide Brigade. Think about that as like the Adventurer Guild. If took Yellowstone Ranch and smashed those two ideas together, where as part of the Eventide Brigade, you can go basically anywhere in the Remnant continent for any kind of assignment. They accept any member, right? They have some rules about how you can come in, but they're collecting requests and job boards of people. They're finding pockets where either creatures have awakened Ren and are posing a danger to surrounding people of the land, or that sort of thing. They're accepting requests on behalf of other organizations that they wouldn't necessarily want to spend a lot of their time with. Whereas like the Highborn houses of Dosharan all would have their own standing force to clear things around their territory, but you still have a lot of wild areas around. So I think the kind of adventures that you'd have are very much in relation to the factions that you are more, or the faction that you're aligned with. But the Eventide Brigade is like the central, like if you are aligned with like the Maelstrom sect, you could end up as a Maelstrom sect member accepting Eventide Brigade requests as a freelancer, right? So I think the requests are much less grand. Or the general adventures are much less grand world-shaping events, even though the world has all of these like large things going on kind of in that way. It's much more ground level focused, right? The characters that you create within Metanoia are wrestling through life more so than they are like going out to save the world.
Gotcha. Okay. So in the survey that you sent me, you mentioned that there are spirits that are trying to enter Ithasen and sort of corrupt it. And that's, well, I guess it depends on the spirit, but you framed a lot of that, the spirits entering Ithasen and start doing something as a negative influence.
Yeah.
There weren't a lot of positive ones outside of maybe the Injurer, but even that was sort of non-specific for like what spirit they were descended from, at least from what I was briefly reading.
Yeah. Cosmologically, it's kind of this is where the setting enters the discussion of good and evil as a whole.
Yeah.
And it breaks away from a lot of gray coding here, is that these spirits are meant to be like principles of reality. They're not meant to be physical beings, because otherwise they would just take all of the different principles that make up reality and squander it, right? When you descend to go rule it, that presence in that unadulterated physical form causes so much damage to the fabric of reality itself, right? It's a huge danger from that perspective. And so the descent of a spirit is catastrophic just by the fact of it descending, much less what they decide to do as part of that. And so in that like celestial realm, there's two camps, really. There's those that are trying to get spirits to descend or descend themselves, and those that are trying to not descend and not get and to convince other spirits not to descend and prevent those influences. So that's where a lot of the like that kind of cosmological tension of good and evil exists.
Okay.
Fundamentally.
So there's this sort of rule that spirits shouldn't do that, and then only the naughty spirits break the rules. Kind of.
Or yeah, and and I think a lot of what's interesting is like let's say you have a spirit of peace, right? A spirit of peace convinced to or of equilibrium or anything, convinced to like that came down onto the mortal plane would wreak havoc in terms of the law of entropy that like makes up a lot of how physics work, right? So there's it's really dangerous for them to come down, and it's against kind of the directive of some of the spirits that are like, we don't want you to descend to rule because we want to encourage the people of Ithasen to look beyond what is there, right? I think that is like a core theme in terms of the cosmology that kind of occurs with the spirits as a whole.
Okay. So trying to sort of keep from being why the world develops, so that it goes along a more natural path instead of just, okay, well, greed descended and now everyone is greedy.
Yeah, the spirits are meant to be like pillars that uphold reality, not to be like prime actors that control reality.
Mm-hmm. Last thing I wanted to talk about the setting was the Akuim.
Yes.
Which are more nasty little things.
Yeah, more nasty little things. What about them?
So Akuim are kind of like, they're corrupted by, we're talking about like Ren. Once you become aware of it, if there's too many cars in the traffic, then there's an accident, and then your Ren does something bad to you. Is that kind of where they're coming from?
No, not at all. They're completely they are a completely separate species in and of themselves, and they're not even sapient, or even barely sentient. A lot of the world building has kind of evolved on that, but they're the ideas that brought the 7 lineages into existence around these specific polarities of the laws of Ren, where it's just taken to a natural end, and they were created as a species by certain spirits that were or the spirit of corruption, namely Ingridrid.
Okay.
So they're broken because they were built corrupted in that way. They're not redeemable. I know there's a lot of racial tension in fantasy, where it's, people are like, well, why are the orcs inherently evil? And I wouldn't even put these like in the same conduit as orcs. Like, think of this as like there's a swarm of worms, right? They barely have intelligence, and people that then have the control over the polarity of corruption can then go harness all of those things to do their unspeakable desires, right? And so that's kind of how they operate as a whole.
So, like, a wolf is like something that's dangerous within the world because it's a wild animal that will attack people and eat them. But an Akuim is more like a actual monster that doesn't have a goal for what it's doing besides evil. Is that a rough approximation?
Besides destruction and and fulfilling the corrupted need that its body has, like the Hollowlings, as one of the corrupted races, they're like a corrupted species around the idea of coalescence, and their predation isn't like mindless in that way, where what they do is they coalesce other Ren from all the living beings around it into themselves, so they don't just take it passively from the environment like Rennim do. They are able to ignore some of the boundaries around other people's wills in some cases, and they will just steal Ren from them and suck them dry, right, as a whole.
Okay.
Like that kind of logic is kind of how each one of the Castborn works, and it's not because they choose to do it; they were built to do it.
Are these all like people? Like they look like human beings or whatever humans are? No, these are like this is like a category of creature. So a hollowling is like a wolf or a worm or a tree branch or something.
I think you could take a lot of the concepts here and think about some more one of the things I try to do with Ithasen and its world building is I want you to have, I don't want it to be the exact same as other fantasy parallels, but I want you to be able to get specific hooks or oh, this is like that. So I just described the Hollowlings. They're a lot like a concept of vampires, but more the half bat formed spawnlings that just kill people indiscriminately.
Okay, so do they have a consistent shape for each of the 7? I guess was kind of what I was trying to ask there.
Relatively,
Okay.
but not in between each other.
Okay. I think that's pretty much all the questions I had about the world of Ithasen. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we move over to talking about Metanoia?
No, I think we covered all the big things. Ren, the cosmology, a lot of the variants, a lot of the things going on in the setting. Oh, the one last thing is like I mentioned this. There's like a bunch of technology being found. So we talked about like there being like a socio-cultural shift that's kind of occurring between all the lineages as they're kind of being pressed together and there's more interaction between them. The other thing that's going on is a like impending technological revolution within this setting, and because of a civilization that's known as the Marathot. We're not doing crazy new world building here in terms of like there's an ancient civilization that was really technologically advanced, but that's kind of there. So I think I'm not trying to call out that there's that element, but I'm trying to like say there's a ton of compression of forces within this geographic region that is the remnant continent, that drives a lot of these interactions between like the factions that are trying to survive it and these kind of countdown events and happenings and shifts in the world.
Yeah. I think that's just like good world building for RPGs to try and squish a bunch of different conflicts into one space so that you can kind of jump around as you want for a campaign or a series of campaigns. Okay, cool.
All right.
You ready to talk about Metanoia?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, the most interesting thing is Ren and how that works. But first, let's talk about the basic resolution mechanic that you have for the game.
Yes. So the basic resolution is a dice pool where you're counting. You count a number of successes. Each dice has to be under a specific target number. And then however many successes kinds of gets applied to whatever you're rolling for. So that number of success is how much damage you do or how much sway your words had in cases where you should roll a resolution. There's a lot of nuance in that, but the goal that I had with the system is to have a very robust resolution mechanic that can give you a lot of detail, but to design the game in such a way that you're only rolling that in areas of severe question outside of just like more challenging or confrontational scenarios as a whole, and be pretty lightweight. To talk a little bit more about the dice pool, it's not a single die. So the dice pool isn't all D6s. You can have dice of different sizes, ranging from a D4 to a D12. Because it's roll under, smaller dice are better. So you want to get more smaller dice is the general like rule of thumb for a good roll within Metanoia. In terms of other kind of outputs that the roll produces, we talked about number of successes. The other one that's been introduced is in relation to boons and complications. So another part of Ren that we didn't talk about, but I think, Isaac, this will be very familiar to you referentially, is texture, the texture of Ren. So that like your Ren has a pattern, but the way that it circulates through you and its behavior there is the texture of the Ren. And so you have tranquil, you have volatile, and rampant. And I think, and basically what this does mechanically is this increases. So tranquil Ren doesn't have a lot of crit fails or crit successes because it flows smoothly throughout your system. And rampant has the most chance for crit fails and crit successes, what we call boons and complications in the system. And volatile is the in between. And so every character has a texture of Ren and that's kind of something where you can have a character that doesn't crit a lot, but doesn't need to, maybe in some instances, or vice versa. So you can play more with that risk reward. In those boons and complications, it's the same thing, right? It's a small table of effects primarily that for a boon, you can add another success to your roll for each boon that you get, or a couple other options that mostly apply to like combat or social scenarios where you're kind of going back and forth in sides. And complications are just that the enemy gets to do that. So boons trigger whenever you, like at the very least, whenever you roll the smallest value on a die, and complications trigger whenever you roll the largest value on a die. So whenever you're rolling, you count successes, you count boons and complications, then you make the determination about what kind of happened during the roll as you compare it against the target number.
So kind of similar to Fantasy Flight's games concept, where you have the boons and complications aspect along with successes. Okay.
Yeah. The target number, the only other thing really here to note, kind of coming back to realm, target number is generally static, but that static determination is in relation to the realm of the challenge or the creature that you're facing. So let's say that you are realm 3 and the creature that you're facing is realm 4. The target number for anything against that creature is lower, which is worse. So it's harder to face that creature because it's of a higher realm than you. And inverse applies, where if you're higher realm than something, then the target number increases, so that you can your rolls generally do a lot better. It only measures differences of 1, basically, and that's because the intent is that if your character is 2 realms above the other one, it's just assumed that this is kind of narrative, and you just kind of curb stomp them as a whole.
All right. From your description of how Ren works with like concentrating will and the different polarities, I'm assuming that's well, I've read part of the system, so I know the answer to this. That's part of how character creation works as well, right?
Yeah. So, I think even since you did your review, some of the mechanics have evolved a little bit. Where, as it stands right now in the mechanics, everything kind of comes down to your values. So the power of your will actually is dependent on the priority that your character has of their values, and this is like probably the biggest mechanic for the system, where on your character sheet you'll have 4 values that your character has, and you'll assign experiences that you have that they can give you a boon in relation, but they should be they should correlate with the value that your character developed throughout that experience or those experiences. And then you'll assign polarities of Ren as like conceptual boundaries for abilities to those values, and you rank the values in priority by making decisions and living in the world of Ithasen. That drives a lot of your power, and so character creation as a result has to, one, give you an idea of who you are in the world, right? Both from like how did you learn Ren? Who did you learn Ren from? what are the relationships that you have? Why are you out there adventuring? And what are the experiences that led you to kind of become a Rennim? Because it's not something that everybody, just commits to do. Even for those that would, sometimes they just don't have the resources. So character creation is pretty involved in terms of getting to know who your character is, but it's not super complex. It provides a lot of variance as a result, and I have a really big life path for it, where what you end up coming out, you start with, okay, here's your life, here are the experiences that you've had, here are the values that your character has in relation to that, here are the polarities of Ren that you gained, or that you kind of pushed into, or they were your visualizations in terms of leveraging your will and intent and values out in the world.
Okay, so character creation seems much more like actual character creation instead of a mechanical aspect for what you're doing.
Yeah. I don't know that you can really have a character for the game without going through that exercise of saying, what values do they have because of what experiences, and then what visualization of power did they use to get them through those experiences or stuck with them, right? Turned into some kind of visualization of power. They're interconnected, and throughout the game, things shift, things change, new visualizations can add new or lose access to some. So it's very much tied to who the character is, and without that, I think you lose a lot of the depth of the game.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's different from other RPGs like D&D. Like, you're not really designing a character, you're designing a weapons package
Right.
in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and a lot of it is like you need to get to that state, because one of the things with Metanoia is your character can develop almost as wide as you want in terms of power and capability. I have a pretty lightweight create your own paper button system where you describe the intent of the ability, or the intents plural. So I want this ability to harm someone. I want this ability to apply a condition to someone. I want this ability to create a wall of solid shadow. You describe the intents, you describe the kind of area or the size and the shape, and you describe the duration, and you now have an ability, and characters can just kind of do that. As you go through play, there's nothing stopping them from creating abilities, and abilities cost a relative amount of strain in relation to those options. So the weapons package kind of comes naturally, and it changes, and it grows wider, and it readjusts to the things that the players and the characters are interacting with. So, but it all stems from what are my conceptual boundaries? It would be really hard to make flame kind of intent, right?
Well, yeah, that's pretty cool. How does it translate into play for the sessions that you've run so far?
The ability creation or the value system? Sorry, I want to make sure I'm...
The value system.
Yeah, I mean, it makes things that seem like small moments actually into larger moments. And it's not necessarily the largest moment all the time, but let's say your character values justice, they value order, they value freedom, and they value power or strength as a whole. And let's say, so now what you as the GM can kind of do is you can build scenarios, and you can work with the lore and the world building to pretty easily put those values in conflict with each other, right? I think Scion 2E is another game that does something like this, where you have two virtues that your character runs towards, and you have to choose which way you have to go. So an example, in a probably largely something that a lot of people could reference, is if you run into the Thalmor in Skyrim escorting a prisoner, right, with this set of values. You value order, but you value freedom, and you value justice. What are you going to do, and why are you going to do it? And that's kind of the question that it ends up asking the player and the character in game. So do I prioritize freedom above order now? Oh, that's going to change all of my abilities, right? The abilities that were really powerful now are going to get weaker, and some other abilities that I don't have a huge set on are now going to get stronger, right? So these kinds of things, they really change how your character plays, but it makes those decisions important.
And do you ever have any players that feel confused by the system because it's more abstract? Or does it work in practice?
Not to my knowledge now. I do I've only had some minor playtests though, so that's kind of next up for the system as a whole. As full transparency here. So and it doesn't have a large swath of players that have played it at this point in time. So I really have no idea. Still learning, this is very much still in development.
Yeah, gotcha. All right. Well, where can people find it to learn more about it?
I have a Discord that I usually post like updates to things that I'm working on, and then I have a wiki that I've stood up and a digital character sheet. They're all linked from the Discord, but yeah, just hop on the Discord. Love to have you. Just talk game design. Like the Discord is not just for Metanoia; it's actually more focused around tabletop discourse. So we'd love to. There's a few game designers in there. We love to chat about how to design games. So come join the discussion.
Yep, I'm in there too. Although I'm mostly quiet. I check on stuff sometimes. Well, yeah, those links for that stuff will be in the episode description. And before we sign off, did you want to give us a little piece of game master advice for other folks?
Favorite quick thing to do to get your party to force cohesion, give them a common experience. This has been really successful to me, where I'll have everybody just roll to see who gets the best roll, and then I'll say you get to choose the last thing that your party did, just for like introducing a new session, and you have 2 words to describe what that was. The best example I had was a guy said rat catcher. They kind of started the session with giant bags of dead rats that they had just cleaned out from the sewer, and all had a great time. That's
all
my
right, yeah.
little GM tidbit.
Such an off the wall, but also like so common, like having rat killing at the start of an RPG.
No, yeah, and just like you can just see the first 2 words that come to their mind, enter into the scene, and just roll with it. And it's always wacky. It's always fun. Everybody gets a good laugh. The only other good GM tip I have is like, and I'm probably preaching to the choir for a lot of folks, is like, set the expectation about what their characters are going to be doing and the specific problems their characters are going to have to solve, at least for the start as they kind of enter into the world. I'm very much a kind of in media res person. I don't want to allow for a lot of preamble when starting off a game. So setting the expectation there is really useful to just so that everyone kind of feels like they're part of the fiction, and then it drifts, different interests, different stuff they want to go do, or parts of the world they want to interact with emerge, and they can all kind of go engage with that together. But they have that common foundation of stuff that they can do, the party can do together.
Yeah. That's definitely always good advice of just like setting expectations for the group so that people know what they should be doing.
This is going to be largely focused around exploration, right? And y'all are going to have to deal with surviving in the wilderness. So think about those problems. It doesn't have to be super specific, but it can drive a lot of thought, and you can avoid a lot of the weird party composition problems where people just feel useless because they built a character for a really different adventure.
Yeah, you don't want that to happen. I had an adventure like that once where someone brought it was a normal dungeon delve, and someone brought in a lawyer character that was just
out of place.
Yeah, it was an interesting character, and it would have been a very interesting development if we'd kept playing that campaign of the lawyer has to learn how to use a shield and a sword and stuff, but just that initial session didn't work.
Right.
It was for a one shot. What ended up being one shot, so it was not great.
Not great. All right. Well, I really appreciate you having me on, Isaac. This was a lot of fun. I had a great time talking with you.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. I'm glad that we finally had it happen.
Me too.
That was Daniel telling us about Metanoia and Ithasen. If you liked the world, there's more you can find out about it on the wiki for it, on the GitHub wiki. There's a link to that in the episode notes, along with a link to Daniel's Discord and his blog, Tabletop Discourse. Also, I do the Tabletop Community Spotlight with Daniel, so you can come to the Go Corral YouTube channel. There's
links to that in the episode notes as well. And you can follow that, do that once a quarter. Yeah, it'll be happening soon. Another thing happening right now is the voting for the Crit Awards. So if you want to vote for those, there'll be a link from that in the episode description, or you can go to the Crit Awards website and then vote on the nominees for what you think is the best, and then they'll get a prize if they win. I did not succeed in getting to the final nominations for this one, but still there's plenty of other TTRPG creators to support. The notable one is Forgotten Adventures, who has appeared on this podcast before, so you can go check them out. And as always, thank you to our patron, Darren, for supporting the show, and thank you to everyone else for listening.